the preamble of the United States Constitution. And you can say these words along with me if you like. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. This morning, I want to share one of the most profound and uplifting and tragic stories in American history, are We the People stories, one of the most tragic and profound and uplifting of these, We the People stories. It is a political story. It is a deeply theological story, deeply ethical story. I am talking about the 1968 Poor People's Campaign, a campaign that survived Dr. King's assassination just 4 months into the swing of it. A campaign mainly of the poor, for the poor, in which people of all ethnicities and races streamed into Washington, D.C. in the form of caravans to secure the blessings of liberty for all, and not just for the rich. These thousands of people on May 21st set up a huge shanty town right there on the National Mall under the watchful eyes of Lincoln sitting in his memorial. The shanty town was called Resurrection City. It was given its own zip code, 20013, and it was a staging ground for multiple daily demonstrations at federal agencies and at the U.S. Capitol for over a month, addressing a whole host of issues like eradicating police brutality, establishing living wages, ending discrimination, addressing hunger and malnutrition, assistance for the poor, affordable health care that works for all, affordable housing, honoring Native American treaty rights, honoring migrants seeking to become part of America, and on and on. Weeks into this, between 50,000 and 100,000 others from across these United States joined with the residents of Resurrection City for a Solidarity Day rally on June 19th. The Reverend Ralph Abernathy, Dr. King's closest lieutenant, who went on to lead the Poor People's Campaign in his immense absence, spoke. Coretta Scott King spoke. Eugene McCarthy spoke. All sorts of folks spoke. But the energy did not match the 1963 March on Washington. People had been complaining about that all along. The 1963 event had been well organized, and it had been clean cut. The campaign of 1969, however, seemed messy and uncouth. The end was not a bang, but a whimper. Life in the camp had been chaotic all throughout, but the day after the big rally, police fired several canisters of tear gas into the city. They said they'd been provoked. Reports of escaped mental hospital patients who were vandalizing things emerged. It was a field day for a press that was different than it had been during the early years of civil rights, when they were more focused on the issues and when they were more respectful. In the latter part of civil rights, the civil rights movement, the press had become more cynical. They had become more interested in spectacle and in evidence of chaos and confusion. And the story that they told on June 3rd, the day after the permit for Resurrection City expired, was about 1,000 police officers who showed up to clear the camp of its remaining 500 citizens. How police ultimately arrested 288 of the demonstrators, including the Reverend Ralph Abernathy. But there is so much to this We the People story to know, this story of securing the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. And we are diving in deep this morning. We are diving in deep to understand, in particular, why it is so important that faith leaders like the Reverend Dr. William Barber and the Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris are feeling called to revive and recreate the most inspiring and important parts of the Poor People's Campaign for today. And maybe we ourselves, as the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Atlanta, can be a part of reviving and recreating this story, the best parts of it here in Atlanta today. And we begin with a quote from the author Milan Kundera, who says, "The struggle of humanity against entrenched powers is the struggle of memory over forgetting." And I would venture to say that the most profound forgetting Americans must struggle to overcome is the part of our history that the preamble to the United States Constitution both obscures and tries to remedy. The road to the writing of the 1787 preamble was a long one. It started 250 years earlier on a different continent in the 1500s. It started with upper-class men of England who had never once seen or stepped foot on American soil, but they smelled an unparalleled wealth creation scheme in the colonization of a mysterious foreign land. 250 years before the preamble that talked about securing the blessings of liberty for all was written, before that, 250 years before that, the upper-class men of England, they dreamed a very different dream than those words of the preamble. Cherished it. Nancy Eisenberg, in her book entitled White Trash, The 400-Year Untold History of Class in America. Now that's a title for you, right? She lays it out. She says, British colonists promoted a dual agenda, one involving the reduction of poverty back in England, and the other called for transporting the idle and the unproductive to the New World. America would become one giant workhouse. One giant workhouse where the poor people who had been unproductive in England would be productive in America. Distant American colonies, she writes, were presented as a cure. The poor could be purged. In 1622, the famous poet and clergyman John Donne wrote of Virginia in this fashion, describing the new colony as the British nation's spleen and liver, draining the ill humors of the body to breed good blood. How, asks Nancy Eisenberg, does a culture that prizes equality of opportunity explain or even accommodate its persistently marginalized people? And the answer is because the original purpose of America was about the management of poverty and making poverty big business for the wealthy. Classism is as American as apple pie. It is rampant even in the hearts of the founding fathers whose we the people expansive hopes were captured by the words of the Constitution. They rightly understood that values like justice, tranquility, general welfare, and the blessings of liberty call us to transform the status quo into something that more closely resembles the beloved community. But they were also people of their time, with the blind spots of their time, mired in the evils of their time, mired in the self-contradictions. As Nancy Eisenberg says, during the Revolution, George Washington stated that only the lower class of people should serve as the foot soldiers, while Thomas Jefferson considered importing German immigrants to the colonies, hoping to improve the work ethic and the breeding stock of farmers and laborers. He said this. Jefferson said this: "The circumstance of superior beauty is thought worthy of attention in the propagation of our horses, dogs, and other animals. Why not that in man?" George Washington was a snob. Thomas Jefferson saw people as things to breed. Our forefathers and foremothers in England and here on this continent saw America as a great experiment in exploiting the poor for the benefit of the wealthy, despite what the preamble said, despite what all of the we, the people, founding documents of America might say. This is how we explain a culture that doesn't do everything it can to eliminate poverty, but instead simply seeks to manage it. You just can't erase the original purpose of something with a flourish of words. You just can't do that. There's hundreds of years of momentum that are in play, and it will take all we have over the course of many years of work to refocus that momentum towards something better. And with this, it is time to join Dr. King in the 1960s. Dr. King knew exactly what Milan Kundera spoke of when the novelist wrote, "The struggle of humanity against entrenched powers is the struggle of memory over forgetting." Dr. King knew. He knew the history of the fundamentally class-based invention of racism, how it was a divide and conquer strategy of wealthy landowners in colonial America, meant to create self-protection against the possibility of poor whites and poor blacks coming together to overthrow their masters. But the possibility was rendered impossible when poor whites were granted the booby prize of white skin privilege. And they got to lord it over the people with black skin. And in the end, the wealthy status quo was never touched once. Never touched once. Dr. King knew. He knew that the white men who wrote the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States of America often were unfaithful to the very words they penned. How the words they wrote called for social transformation, but their behaviors enabled only transformation for some and not for all. Dr. King was not naive. What is the Reverend Dr. William Barber has said? Dr. King understood that what any people puts down on paper can become a basis for public accountability. And therefore, King himself said in a sermon delivered at Washington's National Cathedral just days before his death, he said, "We are coming to Washington in a poor people's campaign. Yes, we are going to bring the tired. We're going to bring the poor. We're going to bring the huddled masses. We are going to bring those who have known for long years hurt and neglect. We are going to bring those who have come to feel like life is a long corridor without any exit signs. We are going to bring children and adults and old people, people who have never seen a doctor or a dentist in their entire lives. We are not coming to engage in any histrionic gesture. We are not coming to tear up Washington. We are coming to demand that the government address itself to the problems of poverty." We read one day, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty, nor the possibility of the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists." We are coming to America to be true we're coming to ask America to be true to the huge promissory note it signed years ago. And we are coming to engage in a dramatic, nonviolent action to call attention to the gulf between promise and fulfillment, to make the invisible visible. That's Dr. King. America, be true to your words. Be true to the huge promissory note that the forefathers wrote themselves and signed. You can be so much better than your original purpose, America. Just look at what you are doing to your people. Look at the faces. Look at the invisible people now made visible through the Poor People's Campaign. In 1968, they swarmed into D.C., coming from 9 different regions across America in these United States, organized in the form of caravans. There was the Eastern Caravan, the Appalachia Trail, the Southern Caravan, the Midwest Caravan, the Indian Trail, the San Francisco Caravan, the Western Caravan, the Mule Train, and the Freedom Train. These were the caravans. And guess how President Johnson, Congress, the FBI, the military, and the media saw it? Just guess how they did. In the same way that too many people today saw the recent Central American migrant caravans. They were seen not in their vulnerable humanity, but instead as an invasion force, as organized criminals, as a creature of left-wing conspiracies. Dr. King wanted America to see poor people the way he saw poor people. But between seeing and understanding always comes imagination. Some story you are telling yourself that helps you understand what you are seeing, helps you digest it and render it understandable. Mark Twain puts it like this. It's one of my all-time favorite quotes. I've said it a million times in this pulpit. You cannot depend on your eyes if your imagination is out of focus. In 1968, the imagination of Americans with the power to eliminate poverty was way out of focus. And in part, it had to do with the very real fear of riots and violence. Just the year before, race and poverty-based violence had broken out in Newark and Detroit. Some of you may remember those images of violence. Dr. King's explicitly stated commitment was to nonviolent protest, the sort of protest that channels the anger and makes it a slow burn force for real good. But it didn't matter. The people in power didn't believe it. They didn't trust it. Another reason for the unfocused imagination in the powerful is that the non-poor audience of the campaign felt entitled to a campaign that spoke to their non-poor sensitivities. In this, I am reminded of a poem by John Davis entitled Preliminary Report from the Committee on Appropriate Postures for the Suffering. We who wear clean socks and shoes are tired of your barefoot complaining, your dusty footprints on our just clean rugs. Tired, too, of your endless ploys, the feigned amputations, the imaginary children you huddle with outside the malls, your rags and bottles, the inconvenient positions that you assume. Though we remain impressed by your emaciation and your hunger, to do anything more than sigh will require a complex process of application and review, a process that is currently in the development stage. Meanwhile, may we suggest you moderate your public suffering, at least until the Committee on Appropriate Postures for the Suffering is able to produce guidelines. The shantytown of the poor, erected there on the National Mall under the gaze of Lincoln, was called Resurrection City. But in reality, it was a disorganized affair rife with singing and dancing hippies, racial tensions and incidents, bullying, the baiting of police officers, and the FBI was a part of the problem. It had infiltrated the camp with agents, and it was sparking things. It was stirring things up. It wanted to make sure, the FBI wanted to make sure that there would be chaos. And top all of this off with rain, continual rain. It rained so hard that at one point, the standing water was 5 inches deep. It was a mess. Imagine now, you're at home in your nice, comfortable living room, and the images you are seeing in the newspaper or on TV are not of sober, clean-cut civil rights activists or people suffering in clearly unjust ways, but rather images of lunacy, scandal, hooliganism, filth, confusion. The media served up spectacle to the American public rather than focus on the real issues. And we know how it ended, more whimper than bang. Yes, nationwide nutrition programs were created, food stamps, free lunches, that was at least one result, but beyond that, fast forward to now. The imagination of Americans with the power to eliminate poverty is still very definitely out of focus. For example, last year, President Trump's Council of Economic Advisors declared that America's long-running war on poverty, and I quote, is largely over and a success. Hearing this, the Reverend Dr. William Barber, widely considered to be the heir to Dr. King's moral vision and leadership, had this to say. He said, "This is more than just untrue. This is a willful act of violence at a time when there are 140 million poor and low-income people in the richest country in the history of this world. Since 2010, there has been an onslaught of attacks on voting rights in state legislatures and racialized voter suppression and gerrymandering. These have all helped to smuggle state leaders into office who then turn right around and pass policies that hurt the poor and the marginalized." He says more than 40,600,000 Americans subsist below the poverty line. This report additionally shows that there are close to 140 million people dealing with some combination of these crises every day. Nearly half of our population cannot afford a $400 emergency, which presents a structural crisis of national proportion that ties poverty to things like health care and housing. That is Dr. Barber. How many of you could handle a $400 emergency? One kind of poverty you may know is called asset poverty. It is defined like this. It exists when a person or household does not have enough wealth assets in the form of property or investments or money saved to survive for 3 months if necessary. Many folks today may not be impoverished so long as they are employed, but could be thrown immediately into poverty if the pay were to stop. Is that true of you? That declaration of President Trump's Council of Economic Advisors is indeed a willful act of violence, an echo of America's original purpose for being, to be a wealth engine for the rich at the expense of the poor. But you know, here's the thing about democracy. Democracy is not done with its founding documents. Democracy is not done with the words like all men are created equal And they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, today we'd say all people are created equal. Democracy is not done with those words. It does not matter that the people who wrote those words and signed those words were mired in the evils of their day. What any people puts down on paper can become a basis for public accountability. America, be true to your words. Be true to the huge promissory note that the forefathers wrote and signed. You can be so much better than your original purpose. America, just look at what you are doing to your people. Look again at the faces. Look again at the invisible people elevated to visibility through the renewed Poor People's Campaign that Dr. Barber and Dr. Thea Harris lead today. Maybe the 1968 version wasn't all that people had hoped it could be, but to expect one event to overcome the accumulated momentum of old history, that is unrealistic. It is time to try again, to fulfill the written down and signed "We the People" promise from 232 years ago. We want to get to fulfillment, no matter how long that takes.